one of the things that I did as a teenager was sneak to buy what we call stick books. Um, these stick characters, but was more interested in the clothes that were being worn rather than the people who were actually wearing them, thinking, wouldn't that feel nice? And that was sort of my, I suppose, escape to be able to have some understanding of where I was at. But like a lot of teenagers, you get on with life and you go and get involved in your athletics and um, all those other activities that you've got to do through schooling and stuff like that. So I'd sort of really never had that background knowledge of anyone that I knew or even vaguely knew who was in one of our alphabet part of the community. It was really an odd, well, probably not so odd, it's just the way that my life was at the time.
The things I saw that were negative were things like the HIV ads of the late 80s and 90s. There were stories of, say, Matthew Sheppard, who was brutally murdered. There was my first wife, her brother came out as gay, and how her family had treated him, even though they were very uh, uh, quite devout Catholics. I'm trying to find the right word here. Very devout Catholics to how their beliefs were, and no matter how much they loved him, they still turned him away because of his sexual identity. And it was one of those things that made me think about how people might take it if I came out as, say, transgender. But even then, I didn't even know what the term was. And so I just thought maybe it was just a self-expression, or maybe it was some kind of drag, but still not even understanding, because there was nobody to speak to or no understanding.
When I left school at 18 and come to work in Melbourne, I still had no idea of these. Well, I had idea of it, but not in a direct personal sense. But the first really sight of trans people, or as quite often they're referred to in the early 70s, of transvestites and cross-dressers, was a term that sort of started to come along a few years later. And you'd sort of sneak into People magazine or the Pix magazine and have a look at some of these articles, and then push it back into the background so that you weren't exposed. And that was probably my first real um, knowledge of male to female trans, as we refer to it these days. And it sort of stuck in the back of my mind, how naive we were back then as well.
Well, the closest I had was, when you'd see movies like, The Bachelor Party, and there was somebody, there was the joke, it was the punchline, it was there was drag queens in RuPaul, or there was Jerry Springer. So outside that, in my 2.5 picket fence Midwest Bible Belt suburbia, it was practically invisible. And as a young lad, up until I was probably about 20 when I finally started actually getting a glimpse of something that was out there. And I think the first trans person I'd ever met, and I still feel ashamed to this day of how I even responded. She came in, and she had like limped in uh, and was really um, cautious and really distant, and didn't really say much. And we went to go meet for a coffee, and I judged her in that moment, because I'm like, this isn't me. This can't be me. There's no way this is me. And here I am, this young guy in a Letterman's jacket from my high school, sitting there, having this conversation with her. But I still remember the first time being called Michelle is when she asked me what my name was. And I had said Daniel, and she goes, "No, what's your name?" And I said, "Well, Michelle." And she goes, "It was a pleasure to meet you, Michelle, and good luck." And I walked away, and drove for the rest of that night, not even knowing how to even process what I had just experienced. And it's funny, I actually didn't even think about it until just this moment. All this conversation taking me back there.
I think that's important too for a lot of us to tell our stories because one of the things, and as we get older, when we recount some of our own personal experiences and relate how we dealt with it, really does help other people to become comfortable with themselves to a degree and nut out ways to overcome the issues that uh, impact on their daily lives. The thing that back in my younger days, because I got married at a very young age, had a young family, and married to a very lovely woman. And one of the things that sort of probably even now sort of is my big regret is not not trying to deal with the issue. You know, just keep on burying it. And in many ways, it was extremely unfair to her. So that this sort of background of knowing, you know, laws and dogmas sort of didn't uh, approve of, you know, being, you know, different impacts on people in so many different ways. And that's one of the things that I found these days that I really regret was the way it impacted on my wife.
No, I agree that, the impact that it had on my family as well. I didn't even know how to actually bring up or have the conversation with my now ex-wife. There was nobody I could speak to. There was nobody I could go to. I couldn't find any support services. I didn't even know what I was dealing with. So for me to even articulate to her what I was dealing with was beyond anything that I could even understand at the time. So, I do regret what happened. But I think the best part about it now is, Greer, that there's those folks like yourself and myself who are here for those who are dealing with that as well right now, who they actually have a means to articulate what it is they're going through. They can look at us as an example and say, you know, I want to be like Michelle Sheppard. I want to be like Greer. I know exactly who and what I am because I can see the person before me.
And that's one of the things that, you know, like as I said, through those periods of time where you sort of go through the collecting of clothes secretly and then purging because you feel guilty that you're doing it, and you can feel and sense the tension that's occurring within the relationship, and finally getting to a point that many years in the future and sort of saying, well, I just really have to deal with this, and finally go and seek some sort of counsel, whether it's because that was one of the things that really played on my mind in the end was, in effect, my wife became the keeper of my secret, and that's really the serious impact of the whole thing.
My wife, she knew about it in the early days when we had first met, but I didn't even know what it was. So when I said to her, it was probably more of a self-expression sort of thing, not really knowing exactly what I was dealing with. And she and we let it go. I mean, I became more masculine over the years, was hiding it. But unfortunately, that when I did finally come out, there was a level of embarrassment for her that she felt because, I remember her words. Her husband's, this American, 6'3" American. He thinks he's going to be a woman. And, here I was, a massive beard and living as such a masculine man that most people were just like, excuse me, you're going to do what again? And so uh, there was nobody was a keeper of anything. The thing was, as soon as my secret came out, because I was the keeper of everything I had, that as soon as I came out, uh, everyone basically just ripped it apart. It was, the body was thrown to the wolves and they just tore it to pieces. And, I had no relation to relate to it. Like I couldn't say to people, this is what it's like, or this is what I'm going through. Because RuPaul's Drag Race, I think it was at like the third season of just coming out, and it was the closest that anybody still had at the time.